Welcome to Freethought Matters. I'm Annie Laurie Gaylor, co-president and co-founder of the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
And I'm Andrew Seidel, a constitutional attorney and the director of strategic response here at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. FFRF is a state church watchdog group working to keep religion out of government. We are the nation's largest association of freethinkers, mainly atheists and agnostics, with 31,000 members.
Please help swell our ranks and influence. Join us today at ffrf.org. We need your help with the increasing incursions of religion in government. Freedom depends on freethinkers.
Today, we are delighted. Our guest is U.S. Representative Jamie Raskin, who is in his second term representing Maryland's 8th District. He graduated from Harvard as an undergrad and from Harvard Law School, where he was editor of the Law Review. As a Maryland state senator, he led the fight to abolish the death penalty and for marriage equality, and he has been a champion of the separation between state and church.
And Professor Raskin had another title. Well, Professor Raskin and Representative Raskin have two titles. He taught constitutional law at American University for 25 years and has written several books, including Overruling Democracy, the Supreme Court versus the American People. And he currently serves on the Judiciary Committee and the Committee on Oversight and Governmental Reform.
Now, we are going to be talking with Representative Raskin about the historic Congressional Freethought Caucus that he recently co-founded, as well as the resolution against blasphemy he's sponsoring, and about why the Freedom from Religion Foundation has named the representative our 2019 Clarence Darrow Awardee. We've got Representative Raskin via Skype from the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us, Representative Raskin.
I'm delighted to be with you. Thank you for having me.
So, Representative Raskin, you're on many important committees, working hard to hold this administration accountable, and in quite a few caucuses as well. But the one that our 31,000 members are excited about is the Congressional Freethought Caucus. Can you tell us why you co-founded this new caucus on Capitol Hill?
Well, there really shouldn't be anything too controversial or spicy about it. After all, free thought, I think, was one of the animating principles of our Constitution. And I think those of us who are members have basically just wanted to reassert the primacy of the separation of church and state. You know, Thomas Jefferson talked about the wall of separation in his famous letter to the Danbury Baptists in Connecticut in 1801. And we just want to stand up for both the freedom of religious worship and free exercise according to people's own conscience, which is one half of it, the free exercise clause, and then the part that you guys are emphasizing, which is no establishment of religion, the freedom that everybody has from impositions of religious dogma or orthodoxy by the government. So that's basically what our charge is, and we've wanted to create a space for members of Congress to stand up strong for the separation of church and state, and to stand up strong for secular values like science and reason in government and public affairs.
Well, hear, hear. And we're also delighted, Representative Raskin, that you're accepting our second annual Clarence Darrow Award. And this is a miniature of the real thing. This is a statue of Clarence Darrow that we erected at the home of the Scopes trial there in Dayton, Tennessee. And we give it to those who exemplify Darrow's commitment to the law and doing battle with ignorance and injustice. So can you give us a sneak preview of what you might say in your video acceptance, or how you're embodying Clarence Darrow?
Well, I definitely don't want to give it away. Also, I haven't really written it yet, but I know what I want to talk about, and I appreciate very much the award. Clarence Darrow was quite a hero in many ways, and stood up tall, obviously, for evolution and for the teaching of science and for essential constitutional values. So that's why I was gratified to be tapped for the award. I don't know if I deserve it, but I will certainly work to deserve it.
And of course, he was a great critic of the death penalty, as you are.
Yes, indeed. Well, you know, in Maryland, we abolished the death penalty after 4.5 centuries with it. And the critical thing was a case of a Marylander named Kirk Bloodsworth, who was convicted of the most grisly, gruesome rape murder of a 9-year-old girl you could imagine. There were 2 different trials. The first one ended in a mistrial. The second one, he was convicted. He swore on death row that he didn't do it. He told his jailer every day that they had an innocent man there. And then he read about DNA evidence, and he begged his lawyer when this new technology came out to get him the DNA test. And that lawyer, who is now the chief judge of the Washington, D.C. Superior Court, Richard Morin, took $5,000 out of his own pocket to pay for what was then a very expensive test. And it came back 99% certain it could not have been Bloodsworth, who was the person guilty of the offense. And they ended up finding the real murderer, the real rapist, in prison with Bloodsworth at the same time. And he readily confessed to his murder after they made a positive DNA match. But in the absence of DNA evidence, Bloodsworth would have been executed for a crime he didn't commit, which would have made all of us complicit to murder in some sense. So I think that that case really changed people's perspective on it because Bloodsworth met the FBI psychological profile exactly. He fit the FBI composite portrait exactly, but they had the wrong guy. It was just a case of mistaken identification. So I think that the actual innocence argument moved a lot of people, in addition to the fact that there's no evidence that the death penalty is deterring anybody from committing murders. In fact, the states that use capital punishment are the ones that have the highest rates of murder in the country, like Texas and Florida and Virginia. And of course, racism and bias and discrimination and mistake continue to pervade the death penalty process. So I was proud that I got to participate in the abolition of the death penalty in Maryland, and I was the floor leader in that. And we were able to repeal a very flawed system that went back to the beginning of Maryland. And the earliest cases we could find of executions were of witches on the Eastern Shore, or runaway slaves, or indentured servants who were accused of trying to harm their masters. So it's a legal remedy that has actually been very problematic for us. And what we found since getting rid of it is that people have been able to think much more creatively about how do we address the problem of violent crime? How do we come up with really effective solutions to dealing with high homicide rates? And what else can we really do to address the problem of gun violence, which is, of course, an epidemic in the land?
Well, Clarence Darrow would have been proud of that.
And so you did this great work at the state level.
I appreciate that.
And then when you went to run for U.S. Congress, there was a little bit of confusion about your religion, whether you were Jewish or humanist or atheist. So does this even matter? Is this something that we should be asking our candidates anyway?
No, I really don't think it's something that should be posed to people to the extent people want to bring it up. I am Jewish. I was raised in a Jewish family, and that is my religious identification. But philosophically, I resonate a lot with what the humanists are saying, because I think we need to promote values that address human rights around the world, that protect everybody's rights, including their civil rights, their civil liberties, their religious freedoms. And so philosophically, I'm very in tune with what the humanists are saying. Well, so I like the movement that you guys are part of.
And you're a constitutional law attorney, a professor, and for me, the Constitution bans religious tests for public office, and it seems sort of counterproductive or sort of suicidal in a way for the voters then to go and demand that our candidates pass this religious test for public office that they themselves are turning around and imposing.
That's right. I mean, the Constitution says no establishment of religion, free exercise of religious worship and belief, and no religious tests for public office. And so I don't think it's really that relevant. I mean, John F. Kennedy probably put it best in that famous presidential campaign back in 1960, where he was being just aggressively harassed and bedeviled about being Catholic and his status as being the first major party candidate who was Catholic, who was going to win. And of course, he did win. But he said, look, you can ask me whether I'm going to take orders from the Vatican, and I'm not. That's not what I'm going to do. He said, beyond that, questions of my belief in religion, in God, in the church, are really private. They're for me and they're for my family. And what should matter is not my private beliefs, but my public beliefs. And he said, at the center of my public beliefs, I advance a separation of church and state. And I believe very strongly in that in a country where no religions or churches would dictate to people how to vote or what to think. And the government would not interfere with anybody's free exercise of their own conscience and their own religious practice.
Well, and he said something, excuse me, that presidential candidates will not say today, which is, I believe in America where the separation of church and state is absolute, in that same speech. So be lovely to have that said again by more politicians.
Well, the reason why people hesitate over that, I think, is the confusion between church and state on the one hand and politics and religion. The founders really did want to create a government which was not imposing religious tests, not imposing religious dogma on the population, and where people were free to practice religion as they saw fit in their private lives. But in terms of religion and politics, there is by necessity in a liberal society a much greater mingling and interchange, because people can bring whatever values they want to the political process, and people can speak from whatever religious or philosophical or moral or ethical precepts they adhere to in the public space. And so while I do think we have a separation of church and state, we don't have a separation of religion and politics, and we shouldn't, because people can import into the political process whatever values and beliefs that they have. I do think that people are more effective when they try to speak in a universal language that crosses one particular religious system or sect, so that they're speaking more broadly, but people can speak in whatever voice or whatever vein they want to when they're in the public space.
And that brings us to the fact that you have introduced a bipartisan resolution calling for the global repeal of blasphemy. So we're talking with Representative Jamie Raskin. When we come back, we're going to hear about why he is co-sponsoring that bill. I'm Annie Laurie Gellor.
And I'm Andrew Seidel.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist, and I'm alarmed by the intrusions of religion into our secular government. That's why I'm asking you to support the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics, working to keep state and church separate, just like our founding fathers intended. Please support the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
My name is Ryan Jane, and I'm an atheist because the vast and fascinating world that we find ourselves living in is cheapened by the idea of a man like God. And I'm an atheist because the rich and precious experience of being a human alive on earth is cheapened by empty promises of an eternal afterlife. We live in a time when, more than ever, we need to be encouraging objective thinking and seeking objective thinkers who will come up with real solutions to problems in the real world. I think it's disturbing that, nevertheless, atheism continues to be viewed by many as a dirty word. I want my daughter to grow up in a world where it's okay to say, I accept reality as it is, for better or worse, and I don't believe in man-made myths and monsters. That's why I'm an out-of-the-closet atheist.
Thank you for watching Free Thought Matters. You can find more content by the Freedom from Religion Foundation at our website, ffrf.org. Follow FFRF on Facebook, and you'll get notifications about all of our content, including whenever we go live on FFRF's Ask an Atheist. FFRF is also on YouTube, where all of our programs, including this show and our weekly news bites, are available to watch anytime. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you on the web.
I'm Annie Laurie Gaylor with Free Thought Matters.
And I'm Andrew Seidel, and we are talking via Skype with a brilliant legislator and co-founder of the Congressional Freethought Caucus, Representative Jamie Raskin.
And Representative Raskin, we were talking just before the break about the bipartisan resolution against blasphemy that you are co-sponsoring. Can you give us some of that background and why you are co-sponsoring this?
Well, there's still 70 countries around the world that have laws against blasphemy or heresy or apostasy or sorcery or witchcraft, essentially imaginary religious offenses. And it was a very important part of our development as a society to have those kinds of blasphemy laws struck down, although they existed in most of the states in the Union. But under both religious free exercise and the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression and association, people can express whatever irreverent views they want about religion, about the government, about politicians. We have no kings here. We have no queens here. We have no monarchs. And we have no theocrats who can punish us for thinking the wrong thoughts or saying the wrong things about them. And yet we have at least hundreds, maybe thousands of people around the world who are rotting in prison in Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or Bangladesh, dozens of countries, because they're basically religious dissenters. They tend to be in religious minority groups, and they are the target of scapegoating and persecution and the wrath of the religious majority. And then simply for praying the way they want to pray, worshiping the way they want to worship, preaching the way they want to preach, they're thrown into jail or in prison, or for saying something which rubs the religious authorities in the wrong way. So I think this is something that America really has to offer the rest of the world. Our founders figured this out. The way that you make the world safe for religious differences and for religious pluralism is to separate church and state and have the role of the government be just to protect people's practice of their own religion against other people's efforts to tyrannize them. And that has been a success story for America. There are people who come to our country who would be killing each other where they came from, but they come to America and everybody can practice as they please without the state being involved. But our founders rebelled against centuries of religious warfare and violence, the wars between the Catholics and the Protestants that took place throughout Europe. They rebelled against Inquisition, crusades, witchcraft trials, and so on. This has been part of the great success of the American Constitution, and we should share that with the rest of the world by standing up for the human rights of people who are being persecuted. And in some countries, it's Christians who are being persecuted. In other countries, it's Muslims who are being persecuted. In other countries, it's Hindus who are being persecuted. In other countries, it's Baha'i who are being persecuted. In some Muslim countries, it's people who belong to the wrong sect of Muslim. The Ahmadiyya Muslims have been persecuted. In Pakistan, I'm happy that my office was involved in getting Abdul Shakur released from prison recently. He was a prisoner of conscience. But there are people like that all over the world. And it's just absurd that in the 21st century, we've got people who are rotting in prison and being discriminated against simply because of thinking the wrong thoughts in a particular society. And we can do a lot better than that all over the world. and I'm thrilled to be introducing this resolution with my colleague, Congressman Meadows, to free religious prisoners all over the world. This should be an important part of U.S. foreign policy to get people released for believing in the wrong religion or no religion at all.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. In so many countries, it is non-believers and apostates. And I wish that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo would adopt your philosophy, Representative Raskin, because last summer's Ministerial on Religious Liberty had a lot of victims of religious persecution, but nobody was talking about the remedy, which is getting religion out of government.
Yeah. There is no freedom of religion without a government that's free from religion.
What has been taking place in the Muslim world in the violent conflicts between the Sunni and the Shia is precisely what Europe went through in the religious wars between Catholics and Protestants. And anytime you allow particular states to be identified with particular religions and have official churches set up, it is a recipe for disaster. There will be persecution, there will be marginalization, there will be vilification of religious dissenters and minorities, and you can end up with situations very easily of wars between different states based on religion. So I think that this is one idea that we can export very proudly and confidently to the rest of the world. That's not true of everything in our Constitution. You know, we still have this electoral college system, which gave us 2 popular vote losers in the last 5 elections, but they were able to capture victories in the electoral college. That's something that the rest of the world's not interested in. Nobody says, oh, that's a great idea. We'll take your electoral college system. On the contrary, people are, sticking with a popular vote that we should be adopting in America. But I think in terms of church and state, we've got something that is now well proven, that is time tested, and that works here. And we really should be champions of it all around the world.
That's right.
Amen to that. So, I mean, we're talking about religious liberty and how there is no freedom of religion without a government that's free from religion. What I'd really like for you to do right now is explain to our viewers in your best sort of con law professor voice, why the modern attempt to redefine religious liberty as a license to discriminate, why this attempt to weaponize religious freedom has no real legal basis whatsoever.
Well, the first thing you've got to see is there's nothing new at all about this attempt. In fact, if you go back and look at the political struggle around the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the efforts to desegregate the restaurants and the hotels and the motels and the lunch counters, that was precisely the claim that was being made there by the racist lunch counter owners or the hotel or motel owners. They said either it violated their free association right not to associate with people they didn't want to, or it violated their religious free exercise right because their religion prevented them from serving African Americans, or their religion prevented them from serving interracial groups of customers and so on. And that was precisely what was rejected by the Supreme Court in the Heart of Atlanta motel case, in the Ollie's barbecue case, a whole series of Supreme Court decisions saying that Congress clearly had the power under the Commerce Clause to regulate commerce. And that's the critical point here, which is if you want to discriminate against gay people and not invite them into your house or invite them to your party, you've got every right to do that. But when you enter into the stream of commerce, you set up a hotel, a motel, a bookstore, a restaurant, what have you, you've got to serve all customers. You've got to serve everyone who comes in. Your religious beliefs do not give you the right to discriminate in commerce against people based on their race, based on their ethnicity, based on their religion. So it's not much fancier than that. The Free Exercise Clause gives you the right to worship as you please, to go to the church that you please, to not go to church at all if that's what you please. But it doesn't give anyone, whether you are Baptist, Jewish, Catholic, atheist, agnostic, the right to discriminate against anyone if you are running a place of public accommodation like a department store or a motel.
Okay, so I've got one last annoying constitutional law question for you, Professor. If you could only teach one provision, you mentioned the Commerce Clause, we talked about Free Exercise Clause. If you could only teach one provision of the Constitution, which would you do?
Well, in 2019, I'm teaching the foreign and the domestic emoluments clauses.
Oh.
I have to admit, I neglected them prior to the Trump administration. But Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8 of the Constitution says that none of us in federal government, members of Congress and the president, none of us who enjoy an office of profit or trust under the United States can receive without the consent of Congress, a present, an emolument, which is a payment, an office or a title of any kind whatever, which is very categorical language, from a prince, a king, or a foreign state. And the purpose of this provision is to guarantee that the president and members of Congress will show complete, undivided, 100% loyalty to the American people, not to Saudi Arabia and Azerbaijan and the United Arab Emirates and Turkey and Egypt and all of these other governments that have been filling up the coffers of the President of the United States.
We are going to have to turn to that to read it, but we are out of time. And it's been so refreshing, an absolute pleasure. Thank you for defending the wall of separation and your leadership and for joining us today.
And the correct answer would have been the First Amendment,
so much
but we'll take that one too. And thank you for joining us on Free Thought Matters.
Because free thought matters.
Hi, I'm Steve Pinker. In my book, Enlightenment Now, I show that the world has become a better place as reason has been overcoming superstition and tribalism. But the values of the Enlightenment are under attack. That's why I'm a proud member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest association of free thinkers working to keep state and church separate. Please join me in supporting the Freedom from Religion Foundation to ensure that our government is driven not by religion, but by reason.